interconnected. He actually started with Canadian Pacific back in 1943 as just an office boy, if you will, helping out. He had taken some courses in drafting, so he was going to be an illustrator, a draftsman down the road. So he started there, and I guess Air Canada, or TCA back then, had better facilities, and they had this photocopy machine where he would come from the Canadian Pacific side, use their photocopy machine, and take the stuff back to Canadian Pacific. So one day an Air Canada or Trans-Canada Airlines guy was talking to him saying, "You're coming back and forth all the time, what are you getting paid over at CP?" And he told him, he said, "Well, we can give you more than that." So in 1944 he started...
$70 I was making at Canadian Pacific. Trans-Canada said, "We'll give you 90.
So that's when he started with Air Canada in 1944 in Winnipeg. So worked his way up, became a draftsman, senior illustrator, worked on a lot of big projects, and one of his, he did technical manuals, illustrations, and one of his biggest memories of the airline and working for Air Canada was it 1953? 54. There was actually an air crash, and it involved a Trans-Canada Airlines airplane and a
RCF Harvard.
RCF Harvard. They crashed. Moose Jaw. So I guess Trans-Canada Airlines had to go to court. There was a big legal battle and all this sort of stuff. So there was a lot of things that happened, and he was involved in that. He made the illustrations showing the angle of the impact and what happened and everything else. So I guess when all was said and done, Trans-Canada Airlines was resolved, they weren't blamed, and his boss came to him and said, "Pat, the most important thing about this whole thing was your illustration showed to everybody and the judge and the jury and everything else exactly what happened, and it wasn't Air Canada's fault, it was in fact the fighter pilot that hit the passenger airplane." So that's one of his proudest moments, and we'll always remember that.
Yeah, he put his hand on my shoulder, and he says, after the speech, the last 3 weeks of the court case, he says, "Pat, I thought you would like to know that the judge says that all the text didn't tell him as much as the illustrations of mine."
Yeah.
So in those days, that was a big thing in those days for me.
Yeah.
Did I save millions? Who knows?
So anyway, he had his long career there. In 1969, I remember him coming home one day. I grew up in Winnipeg, obviously, all of us did. And he came and said, "We're moving to Montreal." And we went, "What? The frogs and all that stuff are going to Montreal?" So it was a big deal. And guys, in retrospect, it's the best thing that could have happened to us. I lived in Montreal from 1969 to 78, where I actually moved to Toronto after the start with Air Canada. But going back to Montreal, moving there, we lived on the West Island. I'm sure there's probably some folks here from Montreal, did some time in Montreal. We were in Pierrefonds. Yeah, Pierrefonds. And so we grew up there, we moved there, fit in, and of course the year after we get there, 1970, the FLQ shows up, and we had all the problems and everything else. So much for real estate in Quebec for all those years. It's finally picked up the last 10 years. For years, real estate just was brutal there.
Can I interrupt again?
Sure, absolutely.
And when my first week in Montreal, a fella comes up to me, pokes me, looks around, he says, "Pat." I says, "Yeah." He says, "I understand you're a uke." I says, "Yeah, what?" He looks around, he says, "Because when a Frenchman comes up to you, talks to you in French, you could talk to him in uke." Yeah, and he laughs and he walks away. About 4 days later, I'm pulling up Pierrefonds Boulevard and Gwen, and I pull up for gas, and I do this. You can see how old the story is. The window like this, the guy comes up to me, and he's bent over, he's talking to me in French, and it hit me what Jimmy Evans told me to. So I answer him in uke, and the guy comes closer, and he looks like this. I say, "I don't understand you, and you don't understand me. Let's talk English." "Oh, yeah, yeah." I'm sorry.
He's got a lot of stories like that. So anyway, yeah, Montreal, we moved there and fit in. It was a great place to grow up. I remember things were different back then, as you're all aware. I remember calling up the corner grocery store on Guam Boulevard and saying, my father wants 24 Molson Canadian delivered. A kid comes on a bicycle, I signed a little sheet, that was that. He still doesn't know that I got that Molson Canadian that he never got. But yeah, things were different back then, obviously. So Montreal, we had a wonderful time there. My dad retired, I guess, what was it,
83.
83. 38 years, 10 months, is that what it was?
Yeah. No, 39 years.
39 years, he likes to round up, I guess, but I think it's 38, 11 or something, but yeah. So he had a wonderful career there, and he's, my brother and I are both, well, I'm retired, my brother's there as a 777 first officer, but similar roots to my dad. He started with Canadian back in the day, because as we all know, Air Canada was very cyclical. Sometimes you can get hired, to hire thousands, and then nobody for years. So my brother started as a pilot with Canadian, and he moved over to Air Canada 1990?
2000,
2000.
when the merger happened.
When the merger, yeah, Canadian merger. Myself, I started in October of 1978 working as a Cat 33 mechanic, which basically was a groomer. I used to do the wet wash, do the tails of the airplanes. Any turns in Toronto over 3 hours, the groomers would do, cabin service would do the rest of them. So I started there in 1982. I got bumped over to cargo as a junior station attendant. Became a cargo supervisor, cargo manager, and then I went.
Can I interrupt you?
Of course. It's your day, not mine.
My son worked in the baggage department there one time, and we landed, we're getting off the airplane, and I could see my son taking the luggage out. And the lady in front of me poked her head and said, see how they're tossing that stuff around? In the meantime,
It was a heavy bag. It was a heavy bag.
him and somebody else, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, that's my son.
Anyway, so yeah.
He was out of school.
So I ended up in cargo, and then in 1994, Air Canada had just moved system operations control from Montreal to Toronto, and at that time I was in charge of the freighter network for Air Canada Cargo, 93, 94, but then they sold off the 60 C8 73 freighters we had, and all of a sudden I was red circled along with 18 out of 24 supervisors, managers in cargo. Fortunately, because SOC had just moved, I was able to go into SOC and as a ATS position, if you will, red circle, and then within a year or two, as Air Canada started expanding again, got back into management, and actually retired in 2003 as the system manager of cargo movement control. So I got my 25 years at age 46. So I got everything I started for, 25-year passes, the pension, the medical benefits. They gave me a year-and-a-half salary. Said, where do I sign? This is what I started for. All was good. So that's over 11 years ago since I left Air Canada, but I've certainly taken advantage of my passes and all the benefits that go with it, so I've enjoyed a long career there. I'm still at the airport 36 years later. I'm actually the airport manager for Saudi Arabian Airlines now, so Air Canada gets that pass. If anybody ever want to go to Jeddah, let me know. I can possibly upgrade you, and some of you ladies, you probably look really good in those burqas, you know, those
Oh, thanks.
But yeah, I can give you my contacts later on, but still there. I still have 2 kids at home. One of my sons just got married 3 weeks ago, so that was a pleasurable time. Oh, and I forgot one other point. Air Canada truly is the family business. My daughter started as an Air Canada Rouge flight attendant back in May. So 3rd generation, Patty always wanted that to happen, so my daughter's there now, enjoying herself, traveling the world. And Air Canada Rouge is not that bad, guys. It's different. It's got to compete with the low-cost carriers. At the end of the day, Air Canada's shares have never done better than they are right now.
That's true.
Because of some of the stuff that Calvin has done, the high-density 777s, which aren't great if you're in the back. But the Air Canada Rouge product is there for a reason. It has to compete with WestJet, Air Transat, Sunwing, and all the low-cost carriers. So some routes they've actually changed. Barbados, for example, went to Rouge last year, and now it's back to Air Canada mainline. So I think Air Canada will fine-tune the business plan going down the road, and Rouge is there for a reason, and it's probably there to stay. So, so that's basically a bit about me. Mike, do you want to come up for a minute and say a few words?
No, you got it all there.
I got it. Okay. Anyway, he's going to celebrate his 25 years next month with Air Canada / Canadian. He's a 777 first officer. He's loving his current lifestyle. He travels all over the world, enjoying it. Oh, while I'm still talking, I met my wife on an Air Canada airplane flying from Montreal to Winnipeg. Her father was an Air Canada pilot at the time. In fact, her mother was an Air Canada flight attendant, but back then, once you got married or had kids, you had to leave the airline. She was a nurse originally. So Air Canada has truly had a huge impact on my life and all our family and everything else. So it's been a wonderful ride, and yeah, I ended up marrying my wife after we met on the airplane, and she enjoys her passes. In fact, we leave for Mexico on Friday. We're going down there for a week just in time with this cold weather, which just reminds me of Winnipeg and Montreal. It's madness. It's not global warming, it's global messed up weather.
A couple of years ago, Michael, the pilot, is flying the airplane, and the co-pilot is going through the manual. That's what you're supposed to do. He's going through the manual, and Michael pokes him and said, "See that?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "My dad did that." And the guy said, yeah, sure. In the meantime, it was my word. Yeah, sure. But I'm 91, a grandparent, of course, and a lot of grandparents like to see somebody carry on whatever business they're in. And it's privately, I get excited every so often that my granddaughter is a flight attendant. And when God calls me, I'm going to wave to her, you know, because she carries on from 1944. And here's another Sowsun that's in the business going to carry the torches. Did I say too much?
No.
Into that. So with a letter from the Bay, and I made a couple of shirts, I went with Trans-Canada Airlines to San Francisco. So I landed San Francisco, I went to the address, I got my peanut shirts, and lady come to the desk, I said, well, I'm from Canada, I got this letter from the big store, and I'd like to produce this. And she says, okay. So she goes back in. I waited a few minutes, the door flies open, and 20 people come up. Well, not 20, but quite a few people came up. They're shaking my hand, and they said, well, did you do that? I says, yeah. I said, well, I'll tell you what, you get your lawyer, we'll get our lawyer, and we want you to produce this for all of Canada, the peanut sweatshirts. And of course I was pleased. I got back to Winnipeg, and we're all excited. But it was a case of me being transferred to, we were being transferred, the head office from Winnipeg, as you know, to Montreal. It was a case of doing this full time, taking a chance, or going to Montreal. And though, you know, so I decided the people that work for me, they give me a couple of $1,000. They took over this peanut business, and I went to Montreal. I've been happier ever since. I talk too much. When you get the chance, come see what
Yes, there's a lot of his work here,
yeah,
and it's very interesting, and please come up and all over.